structure and the way that this theoretical information informs our practice. I do want you to know that we're recording the meeting tonight, and that we are going to try to make this available to other people who can't join us. I would ask that if you have questions, please type it into the chat room. We will be tracking the questions as we go. I will try to make time at the end for questions. But also, if we don't end up having time for your questions, then what we would like to do is perhaps address that on social media. Now, because the video takes up a lot of, I don't know what, bandwidth or something, I'm going to turn off the video and go into audio now. Okay. All right. So now I want to advance the slides. All right, so here we are, translating SI theory into practice. Air sensory integration is a foundation for evidence-based practice, and of course this knowledge base was developed by Dr. Ayres for professional practice, and she was a psychologist and occupational therapist, and most of the developments in this air sensory integration has been done within and by occupational therapists. It's also been applied by physical therapists and speech therapists, and has been adapted for use in education and psychology. You'll see that this foundation is composed of many elements. Dr. Ayres developed the theory. I'm going to show you her seminal book on this. Her models, she has excellent models of practice. I'm going to show you that as well. She had assessments and also an intervention method, as well as looking at salient outcomes. Rarely does someone do all of this work in one career, but because of all of this work, she provided an excellent foundation for evidence-based practice for us. So what do we need to know? What we need to know as practitioners is the knowledge and skills within our professional domain. And so I'm imagining that those of you listening are from different professions, not only occupational therapy, but so we work from our professional domain, and then the outcome is to support participation. We want to use the most valid and reliable knowledge available within our professional domains and use the most effective strategies. And why do we need to know that? We want to know that because we want to know, is our professional service necessary and potentially helpful? We want to be able to differentiate typical from atypical development and understand at a deep level the complexity of difficulties experienced by our clients and know when to intervene when appropriate. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the what and then later the why. But first I found the quote by Dr. Ayres that says, "Theory is not fact, but a guide for action." And I really liked that. I felt that it really addressed the topic that I had chosen for this webinar tonight. So what do we need to know? First of all, we need to know that a scientific theory is more than a hunch. So you might say, you know, oh, I have a theory about something in your world, but you mean it in a more casual sense. When we're talking about air sensory integration theory, it's a scientific theory that is a coherent set of ideas. The constructs are observed repeatedly over time. So that means that if you have an idea about these constructs, a construct such as that the tactile system might influence fine motor skills, you want to look at that and see, does that relationship between touch and fine motor skills stand the test of time? Or is that an idea that then is examined and proves not to be a very useful construct because it doesn't hold up over time? You also have postulates that inform the reasoning and allow predictions. So if we have the predictions that tactile discrimination affects fine motor skills, we can start to predict that if we have fine motor skills, tactile might be a contributor, or if you have poor tactile discrimination problems, it could lead to poor fine motor abilities. The scientific theory is informed by research, and this is something that we're going to look for in the literature. And so I would encourage everyone who wants to know more about this theory to dive deep into the literature. There's many books written on the subject. That's already been digested for you. There are research articles. There's more like newsletter articles. You want to be able to critique the level of evidence or the rigor in each of that kind of literature. And you're also looking at your clinical experience. So the collective clinical experience that might say that, well, we've seen these tactile problems before and we've seen that affecting fine motor control, just, to use that example more. All right, and then what we're looking at is an evolving body of knowledge. So a scientific theory doesn't just exist as the postulates or the constructs that are proposed, for example, by Dr. Ayres. It's constantly updated based on new knowledge, and as new knowledge emerges, then we have the responsibility to update our information on this particular theory. One of the essential features of Ayres sensory integration theory is that sensation is a foundation for typical development. Dr. Ayres defined sensory integration as the organization for use, of sensation for use. Now that's a very simple kind of idea that we find is universally accepted. She wrote these ideas in her book, Sensory Integration in the Child, that she published in 1979, and we were very fortunate to be able to revise this book to have, a more modern look at it and some of the language, and we have some contributors by various authors who are expert in the individual areas. That was done in 2015. I think this is essential reading. So I put that it's required. So anyone who's looking to understand more about sensory integration theory should read this book cover to cover. And I know that it's been translated in many languages, and it's available through Amazon, and the publisher is Western Psychological Services. It's essential reading. This model, Dr. Ayres published in the Sensory Integration in the Child. Her original intent of that book was to describe her complex theory for parents. And so she put this model together so that it briefly described the contributions of one or more senses to increasingly complex functions. Now, many of you know this model, and of course, when we go more in depth in our sensory integration theory courses, we get into analyzing many aspects of the component of this particular model. But it's meant to describe the way that sensation contributes to increasingly complex human behavior. Ayres describes sensory integration theory as a neurobehavioral theory of brain-behavior relationships. This is at the core of the theoretical constructs that the way that the central nervous system processes sensory information contributes to the way people behave, what they do, what they think, their preferences, their sensory preferences in life. And so in order to understand sensory integration theory well, we have to have a certain level of understanding of neuroscience. Additionally, Dr. Ayres examined her ideas through a series of research articles or research projects that were then published in these articles. Now, this is not a comprehensive list, but it does show you a progression of her thinking as she was publishing, starting in the 1960s, about perceptual motor abilities, tactile functions, perceptual motor functions, interrelationship between perceptual motor abilities, and then on through looking at these problems that she called, let's say in 1972, sensory integrative dysfunction among disabled learners. And then she, of course, re-standardized her tests and published those in 1989, and quite a few research projects were published in that, the SIPT manual. If you look at the progression of her work and these peer-reviewed articles, not only did these projects lead to a refinement of her theory, she also provided a model of scholarship and research that we have emulated, those of us who have gone on to work in sensory integration and to continue to build sensory integration theory, that it's essential to continually examine those ideas and refine those ideas, and then also find new ideas that help us understand better. In 1972, she produced the first book on Ayres sensory integration theory, or sensory integration theory, and this is Sensory Integration and Learning Difficulties. This is quite a remarkable book because she proposed her ideas from a brain behavior relationship point of view, and then she also discussed the different patterns that she was seeing, the different kinds of sensory integrative difficulties someone might have, and she started to describe her theory or her intervention, and the reason that she chose the certain ideas that she had for her intervention. Like, it had to be child-centered because it was in that intrinsic drive that neuroplasticity occurred, or the use of centrifugal control, the top-down, bottom-up kind of brain function. Now, some of what's in the 1972 Blue Book, of course, was based on old science about the central nervous system, but her ideas about sensory integration and the way that sensory integration occurs in the nervous system and how it influences behavior, much of that is still very true to this day. Also, as part of her legacy, she did many factor analyses, and these were based on tests that she designed, as well as tests that she felt were related in terms of the functions that were linked to sensory integration. And we see the years that you have on here are each represent a different study. And so you see these patterns that have emerged over time that we still acknowledge to this day. So the link between tactile and motor planning deficits, and again, we see that very consistent link. We call this now somatodyspraxia or somatopraxis. The link between visual perception and praxis, so visual praxis or visual dyspraxia. The link between vestibular and postural and bilateral functions, okay? And the link between tactile defensiveness and regulatory abilities such as attention, hyperactivity, distractibility. And then she also saw links between auditory and some somatosensory perception in other studies. We were very privileged to be able to conduct a factor analysis that was published in 2011, and we found a remarkable similarity to patterns in a more modern sample, further confirming and validating the Ayres sensory integration theory. The other thing that it did was it helps us to better understand the dysfunction. So not only the way sensation contributes to typical behavior, but also how do we see that? How do we see those patterns? And here you see a model that's put together by Anita Bundy and Shelley Lane, and you'll see that many of us contributed to that. And this will be published, or something quite similar, I don't know if they've made any minor revisions, in the third edition to the Sensory Integration Theory and Practice book. You'll see that if you go to the right-hand side of the model, you'll see indicators of poor sensory integration and praxis, more in the perceptual area, with the vestibular bilateral integration and somatodyspraxia, and the kind of behavioral consequences, and of course affecting occupational engagement. On the left-hand side of the model, you'll see more of the sensory reactivity kind of concerns. And of course, those show up more in regulatory functions with the behavioral consequences in attention, affect, activity level, etc., also affecting occupational engagement. So what I like about this model is it takes into account those kind of patterns that Ayres identified earlier, and that we can then identify through our assessments. So the theory was updated initially by Fisher, Bundy, and Murray, and then in the second edition, Bundy, Lane, and Murray, and the third edition will be Bundy and Lane. So the Sensory Integration Theory and Practice book was meant to be an update of the 1972 book by Dr. Ayres. And so this is also an excellent text for anyone trying to learn more about sensory integration theory. I would advise any of you trying to build your library right now to wait for the third edition. I don't know exactly when it will be published, but it's coming out soon, and I would say to hold off on that. We were able to also publish a book, and now it's from 2001, but our goal in understanding the nature of sensory integration with diverse populations was to update some pieces of theory, as well as show how it applies across multiple kinds of population or diagnostic groups. And so both of these resources might be helpful to you. Additionally, I have another resource here, which is the website from the ASI 2020 Vision. What you will see there is our current studies that have been reviewed and links to those studies and the reviews. And I think that this is an excellent resource for people wanting to read more and looking at that peer-reviewed science. Okay, so I only just put the first few on the slide, but if you go to the website, you will see that there's quite a number of studies there, and there's some discussion about them. So I think that this is an excellent resource for those of you looking to know more about Ayres sensory integration theory. I just pulled a couple of examples, two about assessment and two about intervention, because the literature is quite vast. And so I think as you're studying sensory integration theory, I think it's really good to read the seminal work of Dr. Ayres, to hear her words in her own language, such as sensory integration of the child or sensory integration in learning disorders. But then as you get into it, it's really important to keep up with the literature. There's a lot of information coming out about Ayres sensory integration. In fact, the January issue of the American Journal of Occupational Therapy had a special issue. Many of those review papers on the research in sensory integration. There's quite a volume of literature, but one that we're quite proud of is the main author is Zoe Malo, and it's the introduction to the evaluation in Ayres sensory integration. So in terms of a very current article, this was published in January 2018, and it talks about the need for a comprehensive assessment, and I'm going to show you a little bit about that later. Roseanne Schaaf orchestrated an article that many of us had the privilege to contribute to, that was published, oh, let's see, I can't see the date, but it's only been a few years now. But this was looking at the state of measurement in occupational therapy using sensory integration. So this is an example of a more overarching peer-reviewed article on the topic of evaluation in Ayres sensory integration. Okay, so I have another example of something specific in the area of intervention. So Roseanne Schaaf was, and her team was able to publish a randomized clinical trial, and this is the strongest study that we know of to date using Ayres sensory integration intervention. And so this has a lot of specific information about her particular study. And then also in that January 2018 issue of HOT, you see a systematic review. So again, you know, a larger view at the evidence that's available, and this is really good for you to read. So both in terms of the specific knowledge contributions and then an overview on the state of our science. Okay, so why do we need to know that? Why do we need to know any of this? Why do we need to sit with the literature and read the literature? And I truly encourage you to look at the literature that we have available, both the ones that are kind of pre-digested for you in the term of book chapters, but also the very specific journal articles that are coming out about very specific topics that give us a lot of the detail. We need to know that literature because, first of all, we want to know the benefits of our scientific theory. How valid is it? How reliable is it? Do we have a research base that's adequate to inform practice? And I'm quite proud of this particular area of occupational therapy practice in my own practice, sensory integration, because we have a huge body of literature to study. I think it's been consistent over, you know, almost 5 decades since Dr. Ayres started, and you know, it's holding up, and there's more and more people interested and more people seeking out information about the sensory-related concerns, either for their children or their adults or for their clients. This knowledge lets us be grounded in evidence to guide our problem identification and problem solution. Okay, so that's language coming out of the clinical reasoning literature. But we need to know where we have evidence and where we don't. And who can we help and who can we not help? And again, it's, you know, just like I said that the scientific theory was more than a hunch. A professional use of a tool in practice is more than just guessing at what might help somebody and, you know, taking a pot shot at, well, let's just try the swing and see what happens. When we're doing very systematic reasoning about who can benefit from our services, we can also target our interventions with a lot of specificity about what will help and what's needed and who can benefit. So I pulled 3 examples from my caseload, and I'm going to show you how we apply our knowledge of theory to these kind of cases. And I tried to pick a few that are quite representative of the kind of the referrals that I get in my own practice. Case A is a child who's 6 years old. She's developing relatively well, but she has increasing anxiety, difficulty sitting still in a chair, and refuses to engage in sports and family recreational activities. She has difficulty with reading and reversals when writing. So this is a child who's very bright, and people are confused at why she's not doing better in school. Case B is a child who's 8 years old. He's bright, he's playful, and enjoys physical outdoor play and Legos. But he's impulsive, easily frustrated, bangs into things and people. He's often getting hurt or breaking things, and he has difficulty engaging with peers without tantrums or aggression. Case C is an active 16-year-old boy with the diagnosis of learning disorder, mixed receptive expressive language disorder, central auditory processing disorder, and apraxia of speech. He has numerous self-stimulatory behaviors and is often non-compliant. Okay, so I think those of you listening, I think you can relate to some of these kind of concerns. of the family and the caregivers, including the teacher, as they come to you as a professional to try to find some understanding about why do these children have these problems and what can we do about it. So we use the data-driven decision-making model. Okay, here I'm going to add the whole thing. This was proposed by Schaff in the book by Schaff and Melo. There are other articles about this as well, but it's quite well developed by Schaff and Melo 2015 in the, and I'm going to show you the picture of that book so you know what to look for. What's nice about this is that it has refined our idea of a very systematic way of working and reasoning with our clients, starting with the person. It doesn't have to be a child, it can also be an adult. The strengths and participation challenges. We're conducting assessments so that we can know for sure if there's a sensory problem or if there's not something linked to sensation. Generate a hypothesis based on our knowledge of the patterns, and I showed you some of that research earlier. And then create our recommendation for service and predict what we think we can benefit, as well as identifying what we will actually do during the intervention. And then seeing, does it work or not? So this is a very systematic reasoning process. And as I mentioned, this model focuses on ASI theory as a foundation for practice, and it's also intrinsic to the whole CLASSI educational program, all of the modules leading to the certificate in Ayres sensory integration. So here you see the clinician's guide for implementing Ayres sensory integration. This is all, I really encourage all of you to access this book in some way, because that data-driven decision-making model is part of this book, and also it was tested. So this, it wasn't just an idea. Because Schaff was able to do the randomized clinical trial with her colleagues, they were able to test these methods. And so this is an evidence-based clinician's guide, and it's essentially a treatment manual. Now in 2006, we were able to create the applying sensory integration, or sensory integration applying clinical reasoning to practice with diverse populations. So this is also another clinical reasoning guide. And we have a chapter in there on activities, sensational ways to play. So that's maybe very useful to people looking for ideas. Now, how do we characterize our sample? How do we just determine whether or not someone has sensory integration concerns? We have to use assessments. Now, the gold standard currently is the sensory integration and praxis tests. These are a series of 17 standardized measures that are really important for guiding our thinking and our clinical reasoning about practice. We know a lot about this because of the research on this. We also have questionnaires, and the questionnaires are excellent in getting the point of view of caregivers, the family and the teacher, on the different parts of sensory reactivity. There's a few questions in there about perception, and then that's linked to the SPM in particular has social participation and ideas and planning sections as well. We also have our clinical observations, and these are not standardized, but they give you a very good tool for using your professional eye to see things that may not be included in these other measures, or alternately when you can't use these other measures for whatever reason. Some of it's accessibility, some of it's the age of the child, some of it's the ability of the child. There's many reasons that you might not be able to collect your standardized data. Now, one of the questions that we got in advance of the webinar was, what do you do when you don't have the SIPT? How are you able to reliably measure? And it's really difficult, and I test a lot of children in my own practice, and I would be lost if I did not use the SIPT. But we know that the accessibility is a problem, and so the evaluation in Ayres sensory integration is in development, and you'll see Zoe Malo is leading the charge on this project, and many people are contributing. Diane Parham and myself are contributing items, and then you'll see, you know, some of the research team here: Gina Coleman, Shay McAtee, Sue Troutman, and there's now hundreds of people who are contributing to this project. What's exciting about the EASY is that it will be free and online accessible to qualified professionals. And we're in the process now. I put down the process, and we are between the pilot testing and the normative data collection. We're not to normative data yet, but we are at the level of pilot testing all the tests, and we are scheduled to publish this test by 2020 with a big party in Los Angeles in July in 2020. So stay tuned for that. Look at the ASI 2020 website and you'll see more about that process. What the assessments allow us to do is to determine if the data points on our assessment lead us to hypothesize about one or more of the patterns of sensory integration. Okay, so this is a schematic of a clinical reasoning tool that I use that I like, that show these different patterns: visual praxis, vestibular bilateral, somatosensory, sensory reactivity, language-based praxis. Okay, now I'm going to just go back to our cases and just talk about how I see the assessment data and how that theory informed my clinical reasoning about these different cases. Now, what you see in case A is sensory integration and praxis test scores that are pretty much in the typical range. In fact, many of them are quite good. But you see some of them reach below average, or sequencing praxis is below the average range. And we don't have all the data here because, of course, I don't only use the SIPT, but what I'm showing you here is a pattern that leads me to believe that this child has a vestibular bilateral integration deficit, and that's based on the research in this pattern showing the kids are relatively typically developing, but they have low scores in significant areas, including posterior nystagmus, standing walking balance, bilateral motor coordination, and sequencing praxis. And this child has that profile. Now, we need to know a lot about the vestibular system in order to understand how those things might affect this particular child. Now, this particular child had gravitational insecurity, and the vestibular system helps us to know about gravity. It also helps us to guide our postural control. So accurate and rapid information processing through that mechanism in the inner ear allows us to coordinate our posture. And what Dr. Ayres found is that it also affected bilateral integration and sequencing. And further, she found that these children had trouble with reading and writing and sitting still in a chair, and all of those things were true for that child. Okay, so I have observations that I can make that will help me know about some of these kind of components. So not just with the test scores, but further observations, and I can hypothesize that this child is a good candidate for sensory integrative intervention strategies, because I think that we can make changes. And in fact, Dr. Ayres published that these children improved with reading when they didn't actually work on reading, but through improving the vestibular system. Case B is a child who has a profile, if we look at the SIPT, really poor kinesthesia and standing and walking balance. So you see the proprioceptive system is not working as well as we'd like to see it. And then we also see graphesthesia, so tactile concerns, as well as some difficulties in the praxis on verbal command, the language-based score, and bilateral motor coordination. So this is a child with somatosensory difficulties in vestibular, tactile, and proprioceptive areas. And what we know about this is that you can have difficulties in the reactivity to one or more sensations. In this example, I'm highlighting somatosensory. This child was overreactive to touch, also with poor perception of touch. And what Dr. Ayres found is that when there were difficulties in the tactile system, these children often showed dysregulation, and this child is a good fit for that. He definitely, he's tantruming, he's aggressive with other kids, he's banging into things, he's breaking things. So my test scores in concert with my theoretical understanding of the somatosensory system shows that this child is a fit for that kind of problem, and he's a good candidate for the intervention. I've included areas of reactivity. Often we're looking at the regulation, not only just attention difficulties, but also maybe the arousal level could be too high or too low. We mentioned the irregular emotional responses. Okay, and then difficulty with one or more parts of attention. When we look at the more perceptual aspect, we're looking at refined touch, especially in relation to others, and this was a problem for him. Body recognition, you know, where is his body? So he was, you know, breaking things, running into things, and also the refinement of object recognition. So we could also start to predict that some of those self-care tasks might be hard, such as, you know, buttoning his pants if he can't see, or you know, doing other kinds of fasteners or tool use. The proprioception guides us into the understanding of you know, what happens with movement, both from a mobility perspective, but also stability. So how well is he able to move in a graded fashion in terms of the force and direction? This was problematic for him. And how well was he able to hold still and keep his body in place in a nice upright fashion? Again, problematic for him. The third case that I highlighted is a child, and you see this was a teenager with a lot more problems, and even though he's 16 years old, we are comparing him to children, you know, the highest standardization data we have. I mean, in this case, 8 years, 6 months to 8 years, 11 months. But he's showing significant deficits in many areas, even when he's compared to 8-year-old children. Now, other people have identified problems that they've given diagnoses, such as language disorder, or learning disorder, or auditory processing disorder, even apraxia of speech. But other professionals had not identified the sensory concerns that I believe are very significant for this boy. You see problems in the visual area with visual space visualization, figure ground, manual form perception. You see problems in the somatosensory area, graphesthesia, localization of tactile stimuli, auditory, praxis on verbal command, and then all of these tests that say praxis were quite low, as well as the balance. And so my interpretation of this is that he had significant sensory deficits across multiple areas, visual, auditory, tactile, and vestibular, that were interfering with his learning and ability to participate typically, and he needed support in sensory integration and praxis. For that intervention would be appropriate. Okay, so the kinds of things that we're looking for in praxis is the child's ability, or the adult's ability, to problem solve, to initiate, sequence, and complete tasks, to explore or exploit things, their body, space, objects, and know what to do with that. Okay, if we further look at detailed information about praxis, I'm not going to go through all of these things, but I put some of the resources, the current and I think really good resources for you to look at praxis more thoroughly, that gives us a deeper understanding of this. And, you know, I'm circling back to the literature. I'm circling back to the literature here because we also have another book that Dr. Ayres originally published as a monograph in 1985, and we since revised that and published it in 2011, and Sharon Cermak did a foreword with over 2,000 new references. And so if we suspect that someone has dyspraxia, we want to go back into the literature and read more and understand more about this really important construct of praxis. And then we need to know, what do we do about it? So any of these three children, in terms of looking at, all right, yes, they have sensory integration concerns, but then what do we do? How do we design an intervention? So it's not just, oh yeah, I think they have sensory stuff going on. That's important. And do we feel like we have enough data that shows us that they have sensory stuff and what kind of sensory stuff is going on? But now what do we do about it? Okay, so we do have intervention methods that meet the criteria for fidelity to an Ayres SI approach. And what this means is that our intervention is defined, it's well defined. And I mentioned that the clinician's guide by Schaff and Malo is a good place to start if you want to read more about that. We are also guided by the research on evidence for sensory methods. So do we think it'll change, and how much, what is the dosage? And we don't have a lot of dosage studies that tells us how much, but the randomized clinical trials that we have are 2 to 3 hours a week over a course of 8 to 12 weeks. And then what are we working towards? We're working towards participation-related outcomes. And so what are our outcome measures that are showing us that we are addressing the relevant, and in my profession, occupational related concerns, that, you know, it's the so what factor. I mean, what are we doing that is making a difference in terms of outcomes? So we have a few studies on the fidelity measure that have been published, and I just highlighted the one in 2011 because that's the one that has the most, it has the most data in it about the components of Ayres sensory integration. And so I think if you just read one, that would be the best one to read. Parham in 2007 looked at the existing evidence, and what we did in 2014 was look at some of the structure elements. So I would encourage you guys to read these articles. Okay, so what's next? What's next is, well, looking at how you build your knowledge and skills. And I'm very impressed at the list of people who have joined us tonight, and some of you I know quite well, some of you I haven't met before, and I know and so the people on this webinar, some of you are already expert, and some of you may be just beginning your journey in learning Ayres sensory integration. One of the things that we have done as a group is we've started to establish international guidelines for building competencies in Ayres sensory integration through professional development. And I have these in the slides broken down. Level 1, I mean, so you can kind of identify where you are in your own practice. Level 1 is entry level, you know, so maybe just hearing about Ayres, Dr. Ayres' work, or maybe just learning about sensory contributions to function. Level 2 is the certificate level, and of course that's much more rigorous in terms of the knowledge and skills, and we're proposing a minimum program of 120 hours. Some are more, some, you know, you'll have to evaluate that relative to the program that you might want to join. Here are some of the skills. Okay, and this was published in the OT practice, and so any of you who are AOTA members can get that OT practice article. Level 3 is advanced level, so this is where you're motivated to go beyond the certificate level, and so some of you have already achieved a certificate in sensory integration, perhaps by another program such as the one that we worked in for so many years, the USC and WPS program. And then, of course, we don't think it stops there, because then some of you will have already gone on to be experts and making substantial contributions to the literature or to practice or advocacy, education, or research. Okay, so how are we doing? We're okay? All right, so I'm going to turn this over to Katie Estrada. She's the executive director of Class E, and I will look at your questions, and maybe Katie, if there's anything that I still need to address, let me know, but otherwise I'm going to turn it over to you.
Susanne, can you hear me, Susanne? Oh, it's not working.
There.
I can hear you.
Yeah. Let's have you answer. Just tell her I'm having some.
Susanne, can you hear me?
Okay.
I'm going to put all the questions that were asked into the chat field. And if you want to take a look and see. Oh, they did not space out. Those are the questions that were asked throughout the presentation. If you want to take a look, Susanne, and maybe you and Zoe can take turns answering.
Susanne, can you hear Katie? I don't think my mic's working.
Yeah, I can now. Sorry about that. Yes, I can now. Okay, so she was saying to look through the questions
On the chat, and I can also send them to you in an email if that's easier for you to see.
Okay.
We've just collected all the questions that were asked throughout your presentation.
All right, and Katie, do you want to bring up your slides while and then I can go down here. So one of the questions is, has there been any studies relating interoception to tactile dysfunction? You know, I'm going to point you to the literature on sensory reactivity. There have been numerous studies looking at physiological correlates to reactivity, particularly tactile functions. And yes, there's quite a lot of literature there. Let me see. I'm going down looking for more questions. How would you go about assessing children with intellectual disabilities that, you know, that can't do the SIPT? You know, many children cannot do the SIPT for whatever reason. Sometimes it's not even cognitive, it's just they can't sit and comply with these standardized tools. And I still assess in the same way. So regardless of ability, I'm going to use my clinical reasoning tool to look at the various sensory conditions, and then I'm going to ask them to show me their motor skills and their praxis
Because
abilities.
you're on a Mac sometimes. Okay, I'm in it.
Okay. All right. So yes, I would go ahead, but you have to do it more observationally, and then I still use the questionnaires. Will the SIPT, will the EASY replace the SIPT or complement it? You know, that's a hard question to answer. The EASY will provide an alternative to the SIPT. So I'm not imagining in my practice that I would do both. I imagine that I would choose one or the other. And yeah, I love the SIPT, but I'm hoping that the EASY is going to give us even more. We'll see. So far, we've got very good results in the looking at the discriminative validity. What are the qualifications to administer the EASY? SIP certified OT, well, yes, you would need additional training in the EASY, but yeah, you would certainly be qualified if you are an OT with already specialized training. And Tracy Stackhouse, thank you for your message. All right, here, I work in mental health and addictions with adults and teenagers. I've been learning more about sensory regulation. I'm curious. Um, you know, I am going to point you to a few of our experts. Some of them are on this call. Kath Smith, Roz Irwin, in the UK are experts with adults, and Tina Champagne has been doing lovely work on this. And I think it's just a critical area of concern, especially with mental health. Trauma and attachment, Teresa May Benson has done some of that. Jane Kumar certainly had done some. And so I would, yes, I would definitely look at that. ASI and autism. All right, so Ayres sensory integration and autism, I was able to publish with my colleagues a research article in 2015 looking at the patterns. And what we found is children with autism had, you know, a lot of problems. They had a lot of somatic dyspraxia, problems with vestibular, balance issues. They also had problems with sensory reactivity. This has been well documented as well, not only through our study, but in other studies. And so, you know, in terms of their functional abilities, I think no matter what their level, if they're lower or higher in between, I think the children with autism should be screened for sensory integration and praxis deficits because um, it's ubiquitous. For me, it's just every child that I see, it's rare that I would see a child with autism that has no sensory integration or praxis concerns. So yes, any child that you see with autism is at risk for these kind of concerns. Okay. All right, and then Kate, I'm going to hand this over to Katie because there's some questions about the program and she's ready and able to talk about those. So I'm going to just listen now, but thank you very much for your attention and your opportunity. I've truly enjoyed putting this together.
Hi, Suzanne. It's actually Zoe speaking as Katie because my computer froze. But Katie and I are here together, so we are both here to talk a little bit about the program, and we'll share a microphone as needed. But thank you so much, Suzanne. That was such a great presentation. I hardly ever get to hear you speak. We don't get to be in the same room that often. And I should have known I'd be impressed. I'm always impressed with you, but that was really great. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our participants for joining us this evening. And a lot of you have asked about getting access to the slides and to the references. Again, this entire webinar is recorded, which will include the slides, and we will be making that link available very soon after tonight's presentation. So Katie and I, we're here together in sunny Redondo Beach, for those of you in different parts of the world where you might be having some snow. We did have rain today, but now we have sun. So we're just going to briefly tell you a little bit more about the certificate program in ASI. And we wanted to start with just talking about why we started the certificate. Some of you might know that Susanne and I and our colleagues have been traveling all over the world sharing information, and there's been so much information, so much interest in Ayres sensory integration around the world. But we've had a little bit of a gap in the United States. We have not had a lot of training in this important work in the United States. So that was our main reason for getting started. And so we're going to talk tonight just very briefly about the program in the U.S. We do offer versions of this program in partnership with many of the people who are on the call. Margarita Gonzalez from Colombia, thank you for being here. Kath, and I'm not sure if Roz Irwin is with us, our friends from the UK. There's probably others on the long list. So we do offer versions of this program, and Portugal, sorry, Marco, we have Portugal in the house, in many countries. And part of our mission at CASI is to support partnerships around the world. Susanne mentioned ICZ and that effort to have international standards. So we hope that as people move from one place to another, that we will that professionals will be able to take their credentials with them and transport their certificates, that there will be reciprocity. Alex will get to that question in just a minute. So these are our 6 modules that are provided in the U.S. and that are parallel to the programs that we partner with across other countries. We have our first and second lessons online, followed by an on-site workshop, and then module 4 and 5 online, followed by an on-site workshop. So that's to give you a little graphic representation. We'll just very briefly run through. Oh, we have Argentina in the house. Thank you for that. We'll run through the modules quickly. You had a little taste tonight of theory. That was just a snack, but we have a very in-depth theory course that reviews some of the concepts that Susanne talked about tonight and in much greater detail. And for our U.S. program, that is always an online set of lessons. Internationally, sometimes that course is offered online and sometimes on site. Module 2 is a detailed set of lessons on instruction for comprehensive assessment in Ayres sensory integration. And this course covers the details of administration and scoring for the sensory integration and praxis test. At this point, we are introducing the EASY. The EASY is not yet completed, so we cannot give a full set of instructions yet, but we are introducing the EASY, and we are using some of the tests now. Some of the tests parallel or mirror the observations that many people use that have been called clinical observations. So we're starting to use those in a more formal format under the test of the EASY. We also use the sensory processing measure and some other tools for assessment. So the details for administration and scoring are covered online in those lessons. And then we go on to an on-site practice course where the learners have a chance to really use and practice and have feedback and mentorship to make assessment really efficient and feasible. We have found in the past that sometimes learning the test can feel so overwhelming that some people just give up, and we're trying to move past that. And we feel that by giving everyone the chance to learn the lessons on their own time and be able to go back and review, that maybe having the on-site practice will be a better way to really feel confident about being able to use these assessment tools. We then have Module 4, again in the U.S. This is online. This is our clinical reasoning content. Again, some of the details about the background for the tests, some of the research and statistical concepts we think might be better learned individually at your own pace, although this course is still currently often offered in person in some countries. And then Module 5 is a set of lessons on the Ayres sensory integration fidelity measure, the concept of fidelity, and introducing the intervention techniques and concepts. So those 2 sets of lessons in the U.S. are online. And then our second on-site course, a practice course related to intervention. And for those in the U.S. who are taking Module 4 and 5 online, there will be case interpretation discussion, taking those cases right into treatment in the Module 6. And here's just a little summary of that. So I'm going to go back to a few things. Okay, so Susanne, thank you. Suzanne's answering Michelle's question. Michelle asked if the theory course would be helpful for an experienced SI therapist, and she's stating that the theory course will be a nice refresher for people who've taken theory before, with some updates. And, you know, I think Suzanne's being modest. I know that our theory instructors, who include Dr. Susanne Smith-Roley, Dr. Shelley Lane, Dr. Roseanne Schaff, are adding a lot of new content. And I think many of us who take theory once, twice, 3 times, there's always something new to learn from. So we're not suggesting that it's necessary, but I do think there's a lot of great content in that course that many people would find useful. Let's see. Alex asks, will ASI 2020 be at AOTA 18? We sure will. We are conducting an institute at AOTA for those of you who might be attending in Salt Lake City. Next month, we have a day, almost a full day, I think, on that will be focused on the EASY, and it is one step towards preparing for normative data collection. Just a word on that, and Suzanne was mentioning the transition between the SIPT and the EASY. We are working really hard to make the EASY a set of very solid, powerful tools, but they're still in process. We will start collecting normative data internationally this summer, probably around June. So at AOTA, we will be helping to prepare some of the U.S. normative data collectors. We do have over 80 countries currently participating. We have region leads, country leads. Many of them are on, Katie's going to try to stop my phone from ringing. Many of the leads are on the call tonight, the webinar tonight. So anyway, yes, we will be at AOTA talking more about the EASY. Kath did want me to clarify that although access to the EASY will be free for appropriately trained therapists, there are some minor costs in terms of the materials that need to be 3D printed and purchased from available items. So the EASY itself is not completely free, but it will be a very, we think, a low cost and reasonably priced tool. Okay. Let's see, Adriana, it would be, sorry about that call. It would be a blessing if the Class C training was available in Spanish. Well, Adriana, it is available in Spanish through associations in various countries. So please contact us if you have questions about that. The training is available through in Colombia, in Mexico, in Spain, in Chile, and I think we may be looking into Argentina. So we do already have many of the lessons translated into Spanish, and we're working on that with our partners in other countries. Okay, let's see. Are there any other questions? Anything that we didn't cover? And did you want to say anything, Katie? Okay. Okay. Well, I'm just going to put Katie on.
Great. Well, I just wanted to thank everyone for joining, and thank you, Suzanne, so much for such a wonderful presentation. And just to let everyone know, we've got more information on our program on our website. It's cl-asi.org. You can find all sorts of information about the program, more information on each of the different modules, and of course, I'm always available to answer any questions that you might have. And my email address is k.estrada@cl-asi.org. I'll go ahead and type that in the chat function. And please don't hesitate to reach out to me with any questions. Always happy to help. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And like Zoe mentioned, we will have this recording available shortly. We'll go ahead and post that onto our Facebook page and then also make it available on our website. So thank you again from everyone around the world. It was such a great turnout, and we're really excited to have such wonderful representation from all of our friends around the world. And I'm excited to meet a lot of you, and I look forward to working with a lot of you. So have a wonderful evening or morning wherever you are around the world, and hope to hear from you soon.
Thank you, everybody. This is Suzanne.